only announcement we have for today is, well, I don't think you need a reminder that the Feast of Tabernacles is coming up this next week, but we, because of our inability to host a feast site, this was announced last week, but Michelle asked me to announce it again for those people that don't attend every week. So we will be posting 8 sermons on our website on the ECG Holy Day Observance page that were sermons taken from our past Feast of Tabernacles celebrations, 8 being a sermon for each day for those who might need it or want to listen to something. There's a lot of live streaming going on around the world, so I'm sure you could find something if that was not available. But that has been helpful to people in the past, and we have provided even discs to some people that are not able to travel and need to stay local for these holy days. So those will be available. We will post them probably Tuesday evening. So they'll be posted by the 15th. So if you have need of those or desire to watch some past sermons, it's actually a sermon in there. When I went through and was selecting some of them this year, we do this the last, I think, 4 or 5 years we've done this. This year there was a sermon, one of the sermons given by Bill Fox, the gentleman who gave the prayer. I think it was in Dahlonega when we had our feast site in Dahlonega there, yeah. So I didn't watch the whole sermon, but it's good to see his face. Let's go ahead and open to Leviticus in chapter 23 to begin services today. Leviticus 23. Today is the 10th day of the 7th month, according to the calendar used for holy day observance. It is a day where we are appointed to observe this Day of Atonement, the Day of Atonement, not just a day, like there are more than one, but the Day of Atonement. There are some people, a handful of people out there using different calendars for holy day observance, and they may be observing this on some other day, a 24-hour fast, but I would say that it's not the Day of Atonement. That is not the day that God has set aside for a special purpose, which is today. Now, declarations for this holy day are found in 3 places in the Bible: Numbers 29, Leviticus 23, and Leviticus 16. We're going to begin by reading a bit of Leviticus 23 here. When the declaration was made for the Levites to proclaim this holy day, verses 26 through 32. The Lord spoke to Moses, saying, "Also the 10th day of the 7th month shall be the Day of Atonement. It shall be a holy convocation for you. You shall afflict your souls, and offer an offering made by fire to the Eternal." Some have asked in the past, well, what is our offering? Is it the offering that we take up during the holy days? No, it's not. The offering made by fire referred to here is the offering that was made by the priesthood. That's it. It's not referring to taking up an offering on this day. "You shall do no work on that same day, for it is the Day of Atonement, to make atonement for you before the Eternal your God. For any person who is not afflicted in soul on that same day shall be cut off from his people." Clearly, we understand a reference to going without food and water. "And any person who does any work on that same day, that person I will destroy from among his people. You shall do no manner of work. It shall be a statute forever throughout your generations in all your dwellings. It shall be to you a Sabbath of solemn rest. And you shall afflict your souls. On the 9th day of the month at evening," which is when the 10th begins at sundown, "from the evening to evening you shall celebrate your Sabbath." So some of us have observed this holy day for many years. There are some here still relatively young in the faith, but how long has it been? Think about it. How long has it been? How many days of atonement, annual days of atonement, have you observed? Anybody observe 5 days of atonement? I have, yeah. How about 10 days of atonement? Yeah, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I know, you don't have my hand up, but I know you, I know you're in that category. How about 15? Hands still up. That's good. 20 days? 20 annual terms? 25. Okay, a few hands went down. How about 30? Is your hand still up, Art? Yeah, yeah. Art, 30? 35?
Too old to remember.
Okay. Okay, well, I could keep going and going, but it's been many for some of us. And all of these years, Mrs. Gallup, Mr. Bradick, all of these years you have heard sermons over and over again about this Day of Atonement, talking about what it represents in God's plan. Today isn't going to be much different, only this sermon today I'm going to focus mostly on prophecy, and because that is really what is the focus of this day, and it means a great many things about our future. Now, in some of these sermons that we have heard over the years, some ministers have taken the word atonement and parsed it into 3 terms, saying that it means at one-ment. And it's because this day is about moving closer to God. This is true. I mean, 2 cannot walk together unless they are agreed, and in order to be at one with God, we need to be on the same page with Him. But something else needs to happen, something more than just fasting, though fasting is related. We need to learn how to avoid every transgression of the law. We need to learn to be holy as He is holy, as said dozens of times throughout the Scriptures. And on top of this, we need to put an end to Satan influencing our thoughts and our behavior. Only then can we be at one with God. However, the word atonement, it actually does not mean to be at one-ment, even though I think that is interesting and it is related. It is Kippur in the Hebrew, and it means expiation. Yom Kippur means a day to perform a devotion as a show of sincerity toward God. And this, of course, is to be preceded and also proceeded by tangible efforts on the observer's part to make a change toward in our lives, which would otherwise we would be moving toward a very grim future. Some will place atonement in the category of penance, which technically it's accurate, but it's not accurate in the manner, of course, of the Catholic doctrine of penance. The Kippur that God offers is where His only begotten Son died for us, and in so doing, He placated all sin. That is why Yom Kippur required a certain animal sacrifice to be given as a sin offering, and that animal represented what Christ would do. And so let's go over, put a ribbon here. We're going to come back to Leviticus, but I want to turn over to Hebrews for a moment. Hebrews in chapter 2. There are representations of Christ found in all of the priestly offerings. I mean, we discussed that in great detail in our series of New Moon Bible studies, where we went each study, we had 5 studies, and each of those studies we went into great detail about the technical aspects as well as the representations of the burnt offering, the grain offering, the peace offering, the sin offerings, and the trespass offerings. The high priest of the temple, you have all likely heard and know that the high priest of the temple was an individual who represented Christ, and he was the only one that could perform this unique ceremony on the Day of Atonement. And he did this by first washing his whole body and then putting on holy garments for the ceremony, and he would make a sin offering and a burnt offering on his own behalf. And this had to be done before he could enter the holy place, and that is the place where the Ark of the Covenant was, a place that was only to be entered by him once a year on the 10th day of the 7th month. The reality of that unique ceremony, which we'll read about in just a bit, was that Christ was the only one that could be a suitable mediator on behalf of us, of all of us. And that was what the high priest did when he went through and performed that ceremony before he did the actual, made the offerings and also performed the ceremony with the two goats, which we'll talk about. He was portraying, making himself a suitable mediator between God and the people. And that is something that only Christ can fulfill, of course. As Paul said in 1 Timothy 1 and verse 5, there is one God and one mediator between God and men. It is the man, Jesus Christ. In Hebrews 2 and verse 17, it says, therefore, in all things, speaking of Christ, he had to be made like his brethren, born as a man, that he might be a merciful and faithful high priest in all things pertaining to God, to make propitiation for sins, for the sins of the people. So Christ was the only one with the ability to become this suitable mediator, to fulfill the high priest's, what the high priest pictured of the temple. And he did this by his sacrifice, first living a sinless life, his sacrifice, and then ascending to heaven. If you turn over to Leviticus 16 now, we see this represented by first Aaron, and then those descended after him, the high priests of the temple. And also in many of the offerings, just about all of the offerings, I think, in some way portrayed Christ. And the same is the case with these offerings made on the Day of Atonement. So there were two animals that are a focal point of this ceremony of Yom Kippur, and therefore we see that in the ceremony the focus of this Day of Atonement ritual was the high priest and also these two goats. And we're going to read about that now in Leviticus 16. I'll go back a few more pages. Leviticus 16. And in verse 5, this is after the high priest had washed his body in water and performed his duties, getting ready for the ritual. In verse 5, he shall take from the congregation of the children of Israel 2 kids of the goats as a sin offering, and 1 ram as a burnt offering. And Aaron shall offer the bull as a sin offering, which is for himself, to make atonement for himself and for his house. He shall take the 2 goats and present them before the Eternal at the door of the tabernacle of meeting. And then Aaron shall cast lots for the 2 goats, 1 lot for the Eternal, and the other lot for the scapegoat. And Aaron shall bring the goat on which the Lord's lot fell and offer it as a sin offering. But the goat on which the lot fell to be the scapegoat shall be presented alive before the Eternal to make an atonement upon it and to let it go as the scapegoat into the wilderness. So goats, they come in a variety of forms. There are spotted and speckled and some that are just one color, whether it be white or tan. Some people consider them to be quite cute animals, and they are all rather handsome in their own way. But they're all similarly designed. I mean, they're all goats, even one has short horns and one has longer horns. Now, both of these animals that were taken from the people to be used for their ceremony, they would have both been without blemish, understanding that one of them was going to be presented as a sin offering, and so no blemished animal could be offered to God. So they both would appear to be without blemish. One was for the Lord, meaning presented as an offering to the Lord on behalf of the people's sin. And the other would be classified as a scapegoat. Scapegoat means goat of departure. All sin offerings made throughout the year represent the cost of sin. Now, the bull that was offered daily by the priests, that was called a sin offering for atonement. Not for the Day of Atonement, but still for atonement. The offering of the goat for the Eternal was a sin offering. And in fact, the words sin offering and atonement, they appear more than 20 times together in the Torah. They all point to Christ, all of them. And this offering I believe, is even more telling because there were two goats here that served two different purposes. Now, some think that both of the goats represent Christ, and that cannot be for several reasons. I mean, the scapegoat was called the lot for the eternal, not a sin offering. The scapegoat was allowed to live, and even though it was cut off from the people. And this represents a very different role to play in this ceremony, and also a role to play in life. So the goat of departure, it was presented alive to make atonement upon it, and then it was taken to an unknown location called in the wilderness. And what that means, it means an area where people did not dwell. There were no farms there. There were no homes there. Now, because atonement is also associated with the scapegoat, some have associated the goat of departure with Christ as being representative of Christ. However, atonement is not only used to express expiation or cancellation of sin. It is related to the term kafar, which is actually the term used here in Leviticus 16. And kafar, it can mean expiation or cancellation, but it can also mean to cancel or to purge. It's translated, in fact, as purge or purged several times in the scriptures. So to purge means to eliminate or to abolish, and in this case it's banish. The goat represents, therefore, an individual, a being that will be banished. And it is our understanding, the Church of God has understood this for many decades, that it represents Satan being bound and banished both from heaven and earth for 1,000 years. So the high priest, he proceeded to make necessary these preparations, the offerings, the sprinkling of blood in specific locations. He took a censer of incense and went into the tent of meeting. He sprinkled blood on the mercy seat of the Ark of the Covenant. He went out to the altar and he sprinkled blood on the horns of the bronze altar, and he did this 7 times, went around sprinkling blood on the sacrificial altar. And then the focus became, after all that, the focus became the scapegoat, this goat of departure. In Leviticus 16 and verse 20, it says that when he has made an end of atoning for the holy place, the tabernacle of meeting, and the altar, he shall bring the live goat. Aaron shall lay both his hands on the head of the live goat, confess over it all the iniquities of the children of Israel and all their transgressions concerning all their sins, putting them on the head of the goat, and shall send it away into the wilderness by the hand of a suitable man. The goat shall bear on itself all their iniquities to an uninhabited land, and he shall release the goat in the wilderness. So we can see that this goat is not killed, it's not sacrificed because it does not represent Christ. It's instead taken away. And so this goat had all the sins of the people symbolically placed on its head, and this represents the goat being connected to all sin, all the sins, not just of the people of Israel, but all the sins of humanity. And therefore, it represents the devil, who is connected to all the sins of humanity. Now, the occult even recognizes this. In my mind, it's a recognition of this fact, because they place the image of the head of a goat inside of their symbol of a pentagram, which they use in satanic worship or occult worship. But that, of course, doesn't mean that all goats are inherently evil. I mean, this ceremony had a goat for a sin offering. And also, many people don't recognize this, but the scriptures indicate that a goat could be used for a Passover sacrifice, that you were to take it from the sheep or the goats. And of course, we know that the Passover ceremony represents Christ. But the goat, it is an interesting animal, isn't it? I think they're fascinating to watch, and I've fed some at the local zoo here on occasion. They are resilient animals, and some would even say that they are stubborn animals. You've probably heard that expression, stubborn as a goat. Some might say stubborn as a mule or stubborn as a goat. It basically means the same thing, but there's a reason why people used those animals in that expression. Because goats have a very strong will. They kind of set their mind to, it doesn't mean they're smart. It just means they'll set their mind to do something and they just keep at it. Even if that's not a good idea to keep banging your head up against that, but they'll just keep doing it if that's what they choose to do. So these goats are symbolic in my mind. These goats are symbolic of leaders. A leader has a very strong will. He will do what he thinks is right, even when it's not, if it might not be right. And the reason why I say that is because the two goats represent two very different beings. One being Christ, a leader, who set his will to do what is right, and the other being the devil, who set his will to do what is not right. And so these two leaders, they went in very different directions, didn't they? Had very different ways or methods. Sins were placed on the head of the scapegoat symbolically, and I don't want us to think that that means that, well, we can just blame the devil for all of our sins. No, we have a responsibility. We have a part to play. We are free to choose what we will do. And so although Satan is related to all the sins, we cannot blame him for everything. However, Satan is the original sinner. We cannot deny that fact. I mean, John 8 and verse 44, Christ said that Satan was a murderer from the beginning, and he called him a liar and the father of it. And so Satan is the one who deceived Eve, who in turn influenced Adam to sin. And then he inspired Cain to kill his brother, Abel. And eventually the entire world turned to violence and evil. And the rest is history. It's all related to the devil. Now, it's a theological argument whether or not it is human nature to go contrary to the way of God or the way of righteousness. Paul had written in Romans 8 and verse 6 that the carnal mind is enmity with God, or I think it's verse 7, but in verse 6, he said to be spiritually minded is life and peace. And so we have a choice. And every one of us have to admit that we all have a measure of carnality in our nature. Nonetheless, it is Satan's deception that is the beginning of all of humanity's sin. And it says in Revelation 12 and verse 9 that Satan, he deceives the whole world. And so he's got a big role to play in the sins of humanity. And that is why the sins of the people are symbolically placed on the head of this goat of departure. Deeper into this. So Christ, he did not take his sins with him to heaven when he ascended to heaven, so he cannot be portrayed by the goat of departure. Christ is the redeemer of sin. He is not the one that is responsible for sin. Christ lived a pure life, a holy life, and he ascended to heaven holy and blameless. The scapegoat, not so much. So the devil, he continues to be guilty of sins, and sins that seem to have no end. And it seems like people are in our age, although Solomon said there's nothing new under the sun, and I'm sure horrific sins that we see happening today in the world have happened in times past, but it sure seems to be taking a rather drastic course, doesn't it? The sins of humanity. Truly people calling evil good and good evil. The good news of this day, the Day of Atonement, is that Satan is going to be put away, that he is going to have an end, a type of end. Now that end is going to begin with 7 seals. Now, I'm not going to go through the seals today. It's in Revelation 6. They're described there, and those seals are the beginning of great tribulation. They are going to wreak havoc for 3.5 years. It's prophesied in Revelation 6 and verse 8 that the first 4 seals, known as the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, some people refer to them as the horsemen of the apocalypse, that they will have power, it says, over 1/4 of the earth to kill with the sword, with hunger, with death, and by the beasts of the earth. Now, does that mean that they are going to have the power to kill 1/4 of the earth? Or will they have the power over 1/4 of the earth with the ability to kill many people? I'm not certain, but it's a lot. And it's going to be on a massive scale. Destruction or devastation, at least on a massive scale. Now, many people do not realize that the seals of Revelation, those seals are the wrath of Satan and demons. God allows it, but that's where the source of the devastation comes from. Now, notice what happens prior to this demonic wrath found in the seals. Now, Revelation 12, even though it comes after the trumpet plagues, Revelation 12 is one of the inset chapters of the book of Revelation that symbolically describes a number of things that have happened in the ancient past, and then also tells of things that have not yet come to pass. Now, after saying in Revelation 12, after it says that the woman, portraying the church, flees to her place of protection, in verse 6, in the next verse, in verse 7, it says, "And war broke out in heaven. Michael and his angels fought with the dragon, and the dragon and his angels fought." So what we have describing here is a future war that is going to take place in heaven. Yes, a war happened in heaven in the past, and I'll talk about that in a moment. But this is talking about something that has not yet occurred. And it goes right in line with Daniel's prophecy in Daniel chapter 12. And the first verse, it talks about a future battle there. And it says that at that time, when the church or the woman will be taken to a place of safety, it says that Michael shall stand up, just as it says here. War broke out in heaven, Michael. And it says, "Michael shall stand up, the great prince who stands watch over the sons of your people, and there will be a time of trouble such as never was since there was a nation, even to that time." So it goes on to talk, obviously describing events of great tribulation. And this it goes on to say here in verse 8, Revelation 12 and verse 8, "But they did not prevail, nor was a place found for them in heaven any longer." So it's talking about those wicked angels. They won't prevail, nor will they have a place in heaven any longer. What does that mean? Do demons have a place in heaven right now? No, they don't. But they are allowed, many of them are allowed to go to heaven. We know at least Satan is allowed to go to heaven. We see in Job chapter 1 and verse 6 that there was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Eternal, and Satan also came with them, and he had this conversation with God about Job. So we know they are allowed to converse and perhaps go back and forth. They're limited on what they can do, their abilities, but they are allowed to speak to God. At least some of them are. But after this war, there won't be a place found for them any longer. And it says in verse 9, "So the great dragon was cast out, that serpent of old, called the devil and Satan, who deceives the whole world. He was cast to the earth, and his angels were cast with him." So I had given a sermon several years ago titled "Bridging the Gap," and that sermon discusses the earth's creation, which is mentioned very briefly in the first verse of Genesis, and then the earth's ruin, which is mentioned briefly in the second verse of the first chapter of Genesis, and then the recreation that begins in Genesis 1 and verse 3. Now, the Church of God has long understood this, that the world today, that it's subject to the influence of wicked angels, and those are the angels that were once righteous and had charge over the earth, and that Satan, he retains a seat of authority on the earth at this time. He has a position of authority. And it even says of Michael that he wouldn't rebuke him, as far as, he understood that he needed to respect his position. He didn't respect his methods. He didn't respect his morals or immorals, you might say, but he respected the position that God had allowed him to have. Paul called these, that Satan and his demons, principalities, powers, rulers of the darkness of this age, spiritual hosts of wickedness in high places. Speaking of the spiritual realm, high places, heavenly places. Jude 6 says that there are angels who did not keep their proper domain, but left their own abode. And that is a scripture referring to those angels who once had rule over the earth, but they did not do as they should have. They left their own estate. That is, treating it the way that they should. In 3 separate instances, Christ, and these are all found in the book of John, and I have them if you need them, but it's probably not necessary at this time. Christ called Satan a prince or a ruler of this world. And we see that when Satan tempted Christ, after Christ had fasted for 40 days and 40 nights, one of the temptations was offering Christ the kingdoms of this world. Now, Christ didn't say, they're not yours to give. He didn't say, that's false, you're just lying. No, he understood that Satan had the ability to give such power to him or to others. And so this leads us to believe that God, he did give the angels, a number of angels, not all of them, but a number of them at least, charge over the earth. He gave those angels the same freedom of choice that you and I have. And at some point, likely over millions of years, some of those angels turned. Iniquity was found in their midst, and it was found, as the scriptures relate, it was found within the archangel Lucifer, an expression that means a morning star. And Lucifer began to rebel. Now, Isaiah 14 in verses 13 and 14, well, more verses than those two, but the ones I'm going to quote are verses 13 and 14. It describes the fall of that covering cherub. And it says, "You have said in your heart, I will ascend into heaven. I will exalt my throne above the stars of God. I will also sit in the mount of the congregation on the farthest sides of the north. I will ascend above the heights of the clouds," meaning above the earth, because he was on the earth. I'm going to go up. I will be like the Most High. And so that is what he had set his mind to do, like a stubborn goat. That's not wise. You shouldn't do that. But he set his mind to do that, and he attempted it, and it was an utter failure. There was this angelic rebellion. And in Ezekiel 28, another passage that describes Lucifer's fall, there Lucifer is personified as the king of Tyre. And Ezekiel told of this fall, saying in verse 16, "By the abundance of your trading," some translations say merchandising, marketing, swaying people, deception, offering them positions of authority, offering them property, ability. "By the abundance of your trading, you became filled with violence within, and you sinned. And therefore I cast you as a profane thing out of the mountain of God." So Lucifer lost his position of authority at God's throne, a covering cherub, out of the mountain, symbolic of a government. He was cast out, but it didn't mean he could not have contact with God, as we see in Job 1, that he still had the ability to come before God and to have conversation with him. In Revelation 12, a few verses previous to what we had just read, in verse 4, and this talks about that rebellion, it says, that his tail, speaking of the dragon, the serpent of old called the devil, his tail drew a third of the stars of heaven and threw them to the earth. And then the dragon stood before the woman who was ready to give birth, and it's portraying Mary and her child. Christ had said in Luke 10 and verse 18 that he saw this happen. He said that he saw Satan fall like lightning from heaven. It happened quickly, it happened dramatically and powerfully. So it appears that there was a coup led by Lucifer who wanted to take God's throne, and of course we read about it and it seems unimaginable. How could anybody think that they would get away with something like that? But the scriptures tell the story, and the scriptures say God cannot lie, so this isn't folklore, this isn't fairy tale or legend. Considering Satan's past failures and what we had just read in Revelation 12, how there's going to be another heavenly battle, another attempted coup, if you will, why would the devil try it again? I don't know. Stubborn as a goat, I guess. That's what Revelation describes. It describes another insurrection among the angels that is going to occur just as great tribulation is about to begin. After Satan is forever and his demons are forever banished from heaven, he knows that the time of executing his sentence, because it's not like this is news to Satan, like he doesn't know that he's destined to be bound for 1,000 years. The devil likely knows the scriptures better than you and I do. He doesn't believe them the same way, he doesn't treat them the same way we do, and with respect and obedience, but he knows them. And so he knows that his sentence is going to be near within a handful of years. And this is where the 7 seals of great tribulation begin. And so there was going to be, a minimum of 2.5 years of war, of famine, of pestilence, of death. And of course, this includes the 5th seal. If you'd go back to Revelation, well, wait a minute. I'm going to read one more verse. Which one was it? I had it in my notes here. Revelation 12, before we turn back over to Revelation 6. Yes, verse 12. Yes, because it says, "Therefore rejoice, O heavens, and you who dwell in them. Woe to the inhabitants of the earth and the sea, for the devil has come down to you, having great wrath, because he knows that he has a short time." So the devil is banished from heaven and cast back down to the earth, and he knows that he doesn't have much time left, and this is where the 7 seals begin. This is where the Great Tribulation begins. And then if you go back a few pages to Revelation 6, Revelation 6 has the first 4 seals here in verses 1 through 6, and then it talks about the 4th seal goes into verse 7 and 8. And then we have the 5th seal here in verse 9. And what I want to read is part of the 6th seal, because this is a part of Satan's wrath. "I looked and behold, and he opened," this is verse 12, "I looked and when he opened the 6th seal, and behold, there was a great earthquake, and the sun became black as sackcloth of hair, and the moon became like blood, and the stars of heaven fell to the earth, as a fig tree drops its late figs when it is shaken by a mighty wind." And you can imagine, this is talking about like meteors. I wouldn't say comets perhaps, but things hitting the earth that are coming from heaven. "And the sky receded as a scroll when it is rolled up, and every mountain and island was moved out of its place." What's happening there? Wow, something drastic and terrible. And the kings of the earth, the great men, the rich men, the commanders, the mighty men, every slave and free man hid themselves in the caves and the rocks of the mountains, and said to the mountains and the rocks, fall on us and hide us from the face of him who sits on the throne and from the wrath of the Lamb. For the great day of his wrath has come, and who is able to stand? So now we start moving into the year of the Lord, God's wrath. We went through not last week, Sabbath, but during the Feast of Trumpets, we talked about the trumpet plagues. We mentioned them briefly, devastation on a massive scale. And then there's going to be 7 bowl plagues. And the destruction is going to be massive. Huge numbers of people are going to perish. Ecosystems are going to collapse. A minimum of more than 1/3 of the people on the earth are going to die. And if God did not intervene, you can imagine the largest ecosystem on the planet, the sea, that is going to collapse when everything in the ocean dies. The earth would soon turn to darkness, and everything on the planet would die if God did not intervene. But God says he will intervene. And when he does, there is going to be a renewal of life on the planet. And we're going to, we'll hear some messages about that during the Feast of Tabernacles. But God, before that happens, before that renewal of life on the planet, he is going to begin by restoring his relationship with humanity as a whole. And in order for that relationship to be mended, he has to remove the main obstacle to having a good relationship with God, for all people to have a good relationship with God. For thousands of years, this obstacle has kept people from revering God and from obeying God. And God is going to take that obstacle, the devil. He's going to bind him and put him into a prison of darkness. And this is found in Revelation 20. Revelation 20 and verse 1, where it says that I saw an angel coming down from heaven, having the key to the bottomless pit and a great chain in his hand. And he laid hold of the dragon, that serpent of old, who is the devil and Satan, and bound him for 1,000 years. And he cast him into the bottomless pit and shut him up and set a seal on him, so that he should deceive the nations no more till the 1,000 years were finished. And after these things, he'll be released for a little time, a little while, it says. So this event here was foreshadowed by the 2 goats of the Day of Atonement. And of course, we're talking about the goat of departure. God declared long ago, and he did this through an acted oracle that was performed by the high priest, and it was assisted by other individuals likely, but mainly with the other figure we see a prominent portrait of in the Leviticus 16 2-goat ceremony regarding the goat of departure is this individual called a suitable man that would be prepared, ready for this job of taking the goat to an uninhabited land. And that, of course, pictures the angel that is given the responsibility of taking the key and a great chain down and binding Satan. And of course, it's symbolic. I don't know if there's actually a literal key, but that's what John saw. He saw this, and because of what it represented, unlocking a prison, binding the devil with a chain that cannot be broken, and putting him in this prison. So God related these details to us through his servants, the prophets. And notice some of the other similarities when describing what was done. If you go back to Leviticus 16, Aaron laid his hands on the live goat and confessed the sins of Israel, of all the people, on its head, and then he sent it away into the wilderness by the hand of a suitable man. And that man was armed with those things necessary to take that goat away. And I believe that man represented the angel that will be prepared, ready to fulfill his duty of binding Satan. The goat was taken into a wilderness, and a wilderness means it's also described as an uninhabited land. It's a place without dwellings, where people, don't have farms or homes. There's no communities there, no towns, no cities. And that wilderness represents the bottomless pit, a place where there will be no people found. And like the goat that was taken away to no longer have contact with people, so Satan will be imprisoned so that he could no longer deceive the nations, at least for 1,000 years. But we do see that the bottomless pit, like the goat of departure, was taken out into the wilderness and let go. It wasn't killed. So we do see that Satan also will not be killed in the bottomless pit. Satan is going to be released, as we had just read, after 1,000 years of God's rule on the earth. And I don't know, can you imagine the kind of things that can happen in 1,000 years? We've heard that expression so many times. It's just kind of, I think it's almost like a catchphrase or something. But think of a 1,000-year period. That's a long time. What has happened in this country in the last 200 years? Huge changes. And not just in this country, in the entire world. Huge changes over a couple hundred years or so. Imagine the kind of changes that will happen in a world over a 1,000-year period. It's going to be spectacular, beyond words, to express the wonderful things that are going to come in that world. But Satan, after 1,000 years, he will go out, as it says, and be allowed to deceive the nations once again for a little while. And it is only after that last opportunity he has, in our opinion, a last test for humanity, because all people are going to have to be tested by the devil, just like you and I are tested right now. They are all going to have to face the devil in that way and learn to say, no, I'm not going to do that. Or perhaps some will choose his way, and we know that a number will, because there are going to be a number of people thrown into the lake of fire. And that is going to be the execution of his final sentence. His end will come in a lake of fire, as Christ said, a fire prepared for the devil and his angels. Now, the Day of Atonement, this is a necessary step in God's plan toward the world to come, the kingdom of God on the earth, the kingdom of heaven coming to the earth. It points to a world without inherent evil. That's what we look forward to. And we even see the descriptions of the millennium talk about even the nature of animals being changed. Lions and other animals, vicious animals like that rip and tear at each other. Survival of the fittest. They're going to be changed to where even the structure of their teeth are going to have to be changed so that they can chew straw. A lion can't chew up straw right now. It's going to have bicuspids. And those animals live together. No more venomous spiders and snakes that you have to be afraid of. And it's my opinion that those harmful plants like poison oak or what have you, that many of those things will be done away, that those are likely among the thorns and thistles that came forth after Adam and Eve sinned. And then these terrible diseases, it seems like I don't know how many forms of cancer there are now today, or terrible things like flesh-eating bacteria. How demonic is that? Those things are going to be eradicated, removed from the planet. That's just going to be such a great time. And that's what we have to look forward to. When Christ, our high priest, fulfills Yom Kippur, and Satan is bound and put away for 1,000 years. In Leviticus 16, the conclusion of this ceremony here, it says, in verse 30, it says, "For on that day the priest shall make atonement for you to cleanse you, that you may be clean from all your sins before the Eternal." And that is what is going to take place when Satan is bound, a type of cleansing of the people of the earth, so that they don't have this sway of the devil. Oh, we still have to overcome our own minds, but it will not be so difficult as it has been for the last near 6,000 years. It is a Sabbath of solemn rest for you, and you shall afflict your souls. It is a statute forever. And the priest who is anointed and consecrated to minister as priest in the Father's place, he shall make an atonement and put on the linen clothes, the holy garments. And then he shall make atonement for the holy sanctuary, and he shall make atonement for the tabernacle of meeting and for the altar, and he shall make atonement for the priests and for all the people of the assembly. In other words, describing that these duties here of the Day of Atonement were to be passed to the sons of Aaron. This shall be an everlasting statute for you to make atonement for the children of Israel for all their sins once a year. And he did. Aaron did as the Eternal had commanded through Moses. So God made it clear that it was the job of the high priest to make atonement on behalf of the people, and fasting by each person, called afflicting your soul, that this is required, and it's required as a type of cleansing, and it really is an inner cleansing. I'm sure we've all heard some of the details about the health benefits of fasting, and even this past year I've seen at least 3 new articles talking about the benefits of fasting, such as providing the ability for cells to get rid of those cells that are toxic or could perhaps cause future illness, and giving cells the ability to repair themselves. I even saw an article recently explaining how it can reverse damage done to the liver and by other disease, that it's good for brain health in older adults. As we age, we begin to lose some of our memory or thoughts. And it's even, I've seen, there are a few locations, I watched it, I don't remember the name of the documentary, I could look it up if you want to know, but there was one documentary I watched about a year ago that talked about, I think there were like 3 or 4 facilities in Europe, and different places in Europe where people went to fast for longer periods of time. And they would help them there to get through these longer periods of fast and give them some fluids occasionally and what have you. And they did it to fight illness. And they were having great success. And people fighting what would otherwise be, chronic illness or suffering from chronic illness for the rest of their lives. It's amazing. And it's something that God had designed for our body to be able to do. And it's portrayed in afflicting your soul, cleansing your body of the toxins, the damaging things to our lives, which pictures those damaging things of, those damaging sins that are harmful to our lives. It's actually another acted oracle. So what the high priest had done with the goats and the offerings and the sprinkling of blood, they were all acted oracles. And this is an acted oracle, a part of Day of Atonement that all of us get to participate in. You don't have to be a priest to be a part of this oracle. But that right alone of fasting does not atone entirely for sin. The high priest, he had to perform a sin offering, and he had to follow God's detailed instructions about, with the 2 goats and confining the scapegoat in order to make this atonement complete. And so we need that too. We need all of that too. We need Christ's sacrifice, and we also eventually need Satan to be put away. But we're given the ability to put him out of our minds and our lives right now. Albeit not entirely, we still have him knocking on our door quite frequently. But we have the ability through God's Spirit to put him out of our mind and to not listen to that boisterous voice of the devil telling us to do what's wrong while God's still small voice is telling us, no, you should do what's right. We need Christ as our high priest to atone for our sins. We need the sin offering. We need to deny lusts of the flesh that war against the body. And the world needs the goat to depart. Isaiah 24 for a final scripture. Isaiah 24. That serpent of old that is called a dragon, the adversary, the devil, Satan, he has yet to receive his fatal blow to his head that is described in the book of Genesis. But Satan will be eliminated from our existence, but he won't be executed right away. Before his execution, his sentence is going to begin with 1,000 years in a dark prison. Now that sentence will begin on the Day of Atonement, which is why God instituted the ceremony of 2 goats. And that sentence is going to begin shortly before what happens next. Feast of Tabernacles. Shortly before Christ returns, just days before he returns. In Isaiah 24, in verse 21, we have a description of this here. Before Revelation, centuries before Revelation was written, we have God saying through the prophet in verse 21, in chapter 24, "It shall come to pass in that day that the Eternal will punish on high the host of exalted ones on the earth, the kings of the earth." And I see this as him talking about devils, the host of exalted ones. "They will be gathered together as prisoners are gathered in the pit, and will be shut up in the prison. And after many days, they will be punished." So there are 2 events mentioned here by the prophet: a gathering together of exalted ones as prisoners in the pit, and then, after many days, they will be punished. And so the first, I believe, is referring to the bottomless pit, the Greek term abusos. It's likely the same place that is described in Revelation 18 in verse 2, when we see there the description of an angel having great authority, cries mightily with a loud voice, saying, "Babylon the Great is fallen. It is fallen. It has become a dwelling place of demons and every foul spirit, a prison." And I think it's talking about the bottomless pit. So after many days, they will be punished. And the final portion of the sentence is the lake of fire. That's going to take place more than 1,000 years after Christ returns. And a bit of speculation here, it very well may be that the final execution of Satan, demons, and the incorrigible is also going to take place on the Day of Atonement. Would be appropriate, wouldn't it? In closing, there are dreadful times to come before Christ returns, and we see again that that's why not all holy days are meant to be jubilant celebrations, but they are all meaningful. They are all memorials of sometimes of things that have happened in the past, but always looking forward to a positive future. And so they are all a part of God's plan, and that is something to be glad about, something that gives us great hope. A world without the devil. I can only imagine, and I can imagine, what that world will be like. But how we get to that point, how the world gets to that point, not so great. Not such good times. The serpent, the dragon, the goat of departure being removed from this planet is going to lift an enormous burden off of the minds and the lives of people. It is going to put an end to this continual cycle of suffering, of war. And we have this day as an example of what we can expect to happen in the not too distant future, and what we can do, as we fast, as we prepare ourselves for the fulfillment of the Scapegoat of Atonement.